Hello and welcome to Beastly Theories. I'm your host, Andy McGrath. Now, today we have Scott Mardis. Scott's been an active field investigator of the Lake Champlain monster since 1992. He's a former sustaining member of the now defunct International Society of Cryptozoology and a former volunteer worker in the Vertebrate Paleontology Department of the Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences. He's also co-authored a scientific abstract about the Lake Champlain hydrophone sounds, the Acoustical Society of America, and he's the founder of the online research group, the Zombie Plesiosaur Society. Currently lives in Bradenton, Florida. Scott, how are you? Lovely to have you on the show.
I'm good, Andy. Thank you for having me.
So the first thing I really want to know, Scott, is how's the polar vortex affecting you down there in Florida?
Well, it's been in the 40s at night. Not too bad.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess it never really hits you guys hard.
60s during the day, so it's not bad. I'm way down near Tampa Bay. I mean, midway down Florida, so we normally have very mild winters.
That sounds absolutely wonderful, like a dream. It's about, I work in Celsius, so I'd say it's about -3 here at the moment. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, actually.
Well, I lived in Vermont for 18 years. So
oh, there you go.
I know what it's like.
Escape from the snow, the retirement years. Now, Scott, you've been searching for Champ, the lake monster of Lake Champlain, since 1992. So why don't you give us a little background on how you came to be enamored with this particular lake monster? How did you get there?
My first love was Nessie. I was 11 years old when the Rhines pictures from 1975, the underwater picture of the neck and the head, made headlines in the supposed close-up of the head. And the combination of that and seeing Jaws at the movie really made me a sea monster nut. I didn't really get serious about cryptozoology until the very early 1990s. And then I started planning to move to Vermont. My initial idea was to actually move to Scotland. Wow. But that just money-wise and all that, it just was not practical. But moving from Philadelphia to Vermont was doable, so I did it. I made an initial trip up there while I was still living in Philadelphia. My first trip to Lake Champlain was November of 1992, right before the presidential election. I didn't actually move up there until April of 1994. I lived there for 18 years, and then I wound up getting married, and my wife hates the cold. So we kind of came to a Mexican standoff that she lets me go back to Lake Champlain once a year during the summer. So I don't have to completely give up my Champ research. But
sure.
It's a nice compromise.
And you were there for 18 years, and I'm guessing you lived very close to the lake at that time.
Yep, I could go to the lake in like 30 minutes.
And which area, I know it's a very big area, Lake Champlain. Which area were you in?
Very close to Burlington.
Okay.
A place called Winooski, which is essentially suburban Burlington.
I think I might have passed through there this September, actually. Probably. Now, my next question really actually impacts upon that. So, similarly to Nessie and other lake monsters, many men and women like yourself over the years, they've devoted their lives to the search for Champ. They've endured financial and personal hardships, and in many cases, failing in those endeavors, which is the most likely outcome in most lake monster research, or falling victim to the pitfalls of depression and life on hold issues. This type of pursuit compromises. A lot of people end up crashing out. So how do you keep yourself fresh for the hunt, and have you mastered a healthy work-life balance?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very happily married. I have an animal, a cat. I used to have a dog, and she passed away, unfortunately. It's the hunt for Champ is not the end-all and be-all of who I am. It's a big part of it. And I hope to continue the search. As you probably are aware, my research partner, William Durginis, recently passed. from pancreatic cancer.
Yes.
And
So it was very sad.
If you've seen the In Search of Champ or On the Trail of Champ mini-series, you'll know that in 2017, we had a big boat with 3D side-scan sonar, and at that point was probably the best prepared I've ever been, technology-wise, to pursue this animal and be successful at it. Well, due to Will's untimely death and his medical bills, he had to sacrifice his boat and all that technology. So I'm kind of having to start all over again. Hoping, it may not be overnight, but I'm hoping over the course of the next few years to get back to that place with that technology. So I'm kind of having to reboot here,
I mean, that was one of the things I was going to ask you about, actually. Having worked with William all this time, in very close partnership, what were his contributions to this field, and what was the legacy he left behind? Now, clearly, in your life, that's a friendship and a well-equipped research partner that's now missing. But for the community itself, for the genre, what do you think he contributed to this field of cryptozoology?
Will was not only involved in the hunt for Champ, he was primarily known for his work hunting for Bigfoot. He actually saw a Bigfoot back in 1995.
Wow.
And he's held in high regard in the Bigfoot field. He had a cabin up in Virginia, not too far from where he had his Bigfoot sighting. Had everything rigged up with trail cams to try to capture an image of Bigfoot. He had engineered a lot of our own cameras, which he called I Gotcha, which is the same sort of time-lapse camera that he was using on land for Bigfoot. He adapted for underwater, kind of like in containers, like the cameras that Bob Rhines was using back in the 70s, these yellow. We were using the same kind of camera that he had engineered at Lake Champlain underwater, attached to an anchor and a buoy. So we would go to fairly deep places, like 30, 40, 50 feet deep, and anchor these cameras on the bottom. They were set to film upwards using the light of the sun to catch the silhouette of something swimming over the top. And the best luck we had with the underwater camera was back in 2014. We got an image of a fish swimming over the top of the camera.
Fantastic.
It was time lapse. It could go all day. And if something had happened to swim over the top of it, we would have gotten an image of it at Champ or whatever.
I just think that's a really clever way to go about it, because it's not being activated by anything passing it, and perhaps it's a lot less obtrusive to the animals, in their natural environment there.
Yeah. We had the cameras with us in 2017, but unfortunately, the water visibility that year was really bad, and we got no usable images from that trip. But we did get the sonar hit, plesiosaur-shaped sonar hit, which is on the documentary. I'm sure you saw that.
Yeah, I did see. I reviewed that documentary, actually, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I actually saw it before I visited the areas. It was a great guide for me, visiting and seeing, in real life terms, what you guys see all the time and what you filmed in the documentary. What I was staggered by, actually, is the sheer size of the lake. I think it's 114, 115 miles long, something like that.
Roughly 120 miles long.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. And it's several miles wide in places.
I think it's 11 miles wide.
Wow. I mean, when you go to Loch Ness, you see it's such a different environment, 25 miles more or less, and a mile and a half.
Loch Ness is like twice the depth.
Oh, it's huge.
It's like a vertical wall of water. It's just staggering the depth of it.
What's the deepest part of Champlain?
400 feet deep.
Okay.
Near Split Rock. And I believe Loch Ness is at least 750 feet deep, maybe a little deeper.
Yeah, well, I think it's disputed, but yeah, it's supposed to be around about that depth.
I think everybody accepts 750.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, even if you took 150 feet off that, you're still talking about a very deep body of water. I was there very recently, actually. It was a very, very good time. Now, these days, it's very unpopular to assert that lake monsters are plesiosaurs or some form of their descendants. Now, I know that you might be a little more on the plesiosaur side of thinking. Well, what evidence do you think there may be for a plesiosaur-like creature at Lake Champlain?
Well, two pieces of video evidence very much resemble a plesiosaur. That's Sandra Manzi's 1977 photograph, which resembles something along the lines of a plesiosaur looking over its back. Mm-hmm. Then there's Peter Baudet's video from 2005, which appears to show some kind of object resembling a plesiosaur's head and neck, and possibly a flipper, which comes out in the later part of the video. I'm sure you've seen that video as well.
I have, yes. Yep. Yes, I have.
And probably beyond those two, the most impressive is the Eric Olson video from 2009, which shows a kind of a turtle-ish looking creature.
I see.
So it looks like it has somewhat shorter neck than the things you see in the Baudet and Nancy photograph. But some plesiosaurs were kind of turtle-like and had shorter necks. So, I would think that one of those three, or possibly two of those three videos, gives us a general rough estimate of what the morphology of these animals are, if they exist. I believe they exist, but I can't prove it yet. So I'm speaking lawyer speak here.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was just wondering, do the witness reports also corroborate that plesiosaur-like description?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, for the most part, what kind of percentage would you?
Yes. But, people can argue that the idea that these monsters might be plesiosaurs has been floating around since the 1830s. So we could say that it's possible that preconceptions on the ideas of people may be coloring their remembrance of what they think they saw. You can't go back in a time machine and verify an eyewitness.
Sure.
But you've got pieces of photographic evidence from Lake Champlain, and especially from Loch Ness, that seem to corroborate the eyewitness testimony.
I think you're right about that, personally.
You can go back and look at a video or a photograph and study it again and again and again. You cannot do that with somebody's verbal description from an eyewitness. Yeah. In regards to the eyewitnesses, however, what types of monster imposters do you think they could be seeing at Lake Champlain if they're making a mistake, if they're making errors? Do you ever get seals at Lake Champlain? Yes,
is there any way for seals to get inside?
Well, there were plenty of seals getting in the lake back in the 1800s. Now, there are a system of dams and canals on both rivers that connect Lake Champlain to the ocean. But I think it was in 2016, a seal tried to get into Champlain-Hudson Canal, which has 9 locks. So it had entered the Hudson River and was almost going to get into one of the canal locks. So theoretically, if a seal was lucky, it could get into Lake Champlain now.
Okay.
But it would have a hard time doing that and remaining inconspicuous in the process. But seals do get into Loch Ness now.
They do. They certainly do. And it's not a it's not a direct route. There are locks and dams and things like that in the way as well. Canals primarily.
I would point out that usually when this happens, they are immediately recognized as a seal.
Yes,
so
they are.
You can balance it both ways, you know. I mean, if you got a quick glimpse of it and didn't realize what it was, theoretically you could mistake it for a quote monster. But most of the time, people see it, they say, "Oh, that's a seal." You know, they're not saying,
I think that's the thing about seals, Scott, is they're very conspicuous, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really keep themselves hidden. I remember observing some seals in St. Ives in Cornwall, and I observed them swimming beneath the surface out in the bay. That was about 200 feet away. I didn't realize there were seals there when I first got there, but immediately, even beneath the water, it was clear to me that they were seals.
Yeah.
I had no problem identifying, oh, look, there's a seal beneath the waves swimming below that surfer. I never thought for a moment it was something else or something unusual. And I think that's
the point with these. The Champlain that we have is a resident population of lake sturgeons, which can get feet long. And I'm almost certain that a certain subset of marginal champ sightings are probably sightings of large lake sturgeons.
Would that be back sightings in particular?
What's that?
Or would that be back sightings in particular, or if somebody claims to see a flipper of some kind?
Most likely, yes.
Mm-hmm. That would make sense to me, for sure. Yeah. Now, on this subject, actually, while we're talking about this subject, a lot of people within the community complain that lake monster research seems to be overrun with skeptics or non-believers. But what are your thoughts on the added value of skeptical research? And do you think there's a line that skeptics can cross where they change from objective skepticism to philosophical skepticism?
Yeah, well, there's a subset of skeptical thought that is called radical skepticism, which is like, you know, it's so far into the skeptical idea that it's like it begins with the basic premise that this thing cannot exist. Therefore, any arguments that there could be something to it are invalid just from the get-go. Now,
just defined by a worldview.
Yeah, exactly. I don't support that brand of skepticism. But in the absence yet of a type specimen to prove that these animals exist, I think healthy skepticism is valid. One thing I've said before to people is that whether these animals exist or not, anything that anybody says about it, it's not going to change that.
Yes.
No matter how much I want to believe there's something there, if it doesn't exist, all the arguments that I can make to say it exists, it's not going to make it exist.
I agree with that.
All the negative arguments in the world are not going to make it disappear. So I try to keep that idea in perspective. So, and a lot of people, believers and skeptics alike, get upset with each other because they can't convince the other person of the view that they're convinced of. So I try to just be philosophical about it.
Well, I noticed that you walk that line very, very well, actually, and I've always admired that. The reason is, I think, talking about worldviews, is that oftentimes you have worldview believers and worldview skeptics, and what we actually need is not believers but researchers and objective skeptics.
Yeah,
and that's where they help each other and work together to
learned,
solve whatever is
a particular piece of evidence. I try to learn everything that anybody's ever said about it. And though I may have my opinion about what this particular piece of evidence represents, I try to present the other arguments and just put it all on the table and say, look, this is what everybody has said about this. Make up your own mind. That doesn't mean I don't have an opinion about it. It just means I believe in presenting all the arguments. Some of the arguments the skeptical arguments, they go to such lengths to explain it away. Some of the skeptical arguments are inherently more ridiculous than the idea that it's just an animal that we don't know about. You know.
Well, I mean, this is something I remember Roland Watson referred to that as the my theory sucks the least theory.
Mm.
You know, sure, perhaps there isn't a 20-foot long eel that can raise its neck out of the water living in Loch Ness that beats the theory that there's a plesiosaur living from the time of the dinosaurs, still alive and thriving in our modern lochs and lakes.
Kind of hypothetical animals that have been hypothesized to explain. They've come up with eels that look like plesiosaurs, seals that look like plesiosaurs, turtles that look like plesiosaurs, long-necked whales, all kinds of things. No, that's fine. It's possible. But why make up an animal when you've already got one that we know that was real, that really existed?
Exactly.
That fits probably 75% of the description. And this animal is supposed to have been extinct for 65 million years. If it has undergone a complete, further evolution past the 65 million years, it may have changed a little bit.
So, talking about that evolution and adaptation and things we know from fossils and things we infer that we know, or I always say exclusions based upon assumptions. People say that they're not seen enough and there would be an air-breathing animal. Now, I really liked your research into the butt-breathing turtle.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about that and how that could correspond to maybe plesiosaurs as well, or lake monsters of some kind.
Well, there's a thing called cloacal bursae respiration that is used by certain turtles, freshwater turtles in Australia. Particularly this one, the Fitzroy River turtle, they believe gets 70% of its oxygen directly from the water using this method. And essentially how it works is that reptiles, their butt, as you would call it, they do all of their business, giving birth, sex, and all this, out of one orifice called a cloaca, right? So in these turtles, this cloaca is lined with a sac filled with blood vessels. So what they're doing, they're drawing water with oxygen in it into their cloaca. And these blood vessels that line this sac are absorbing the oxygen from the water like a fish gill. And it's going from the water into these blood veins, into the blood system, and getting into their, the lungs and heart and all that, their vascular system. So they're essentially using their cloaca as a fish gill.
Okay. So they're absorbing oxygen from the water.
Yeah, exactly. And they believe the Fitzroy River turtle is getting 70% of its oxygen through this method. So it's essentially breathing most of the time when it's underwater like a fish.
Wow.
And it's oxygen directly from the water. Okay, now that is an established fact. There's a website about paleontology called Paleos. And they had an entry on elasmosaurs, the super long-necked plesiosaurs that had necks that were 2/3 the length of their body. And they were speculating, they were saying, well, if an elasmosaur was sitting on the bottom, because of that long neck, it might have a hard time getting oxygen from its head all the way down that long neck to the smaller body.
I see, yes.
So they were suggesting that, and we already know that reptiles can absorb a certain amount of oxygen directly through their skin, which mammals can't do. So they were suggesting in this article on elasmosaurs that perhaps elasmosaurs were exploiting, underwater forms of respiration, and then they mentioned the cloacal possibility too. So
And
That's as close as we've got to taking this idea from the turtles, where
wow.
it is established, and saying that plesiosaurs might have been able to do this too. Now, anybody can look at the basic body configuration of a plesiosaur and see how similar it is to the body of a turtle.
Uh-huh.
The idea is not that far-fetched. Now, the cloaca sac, like the turtle has, would be a soft tissue thing that wouldn't necessarily be preserved on a fossil.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah, sure.
in recent years, they have found soft tissue parts of certain marine reptiles, fossils. They've found a kidney on a mosasaur. They found an eye. They found skin impressions and blubber from a plesiosaur in Mexico called Mauriciosaurus.
Uh-huh.
Now they know they had blubber. And there was
Wow.
an article about the ichthyosaur with blubber too.
I read that recent one, yes.
Yeah.
So this is amazing if they had
never
blubber.
know. Maybe someday we will find evidence of cloacal vertebrate respiration fossilized as soft tissue. But it's,
That would be amazing. But in the meantime, this actually gives a plausible theory as to why these creatures aren't seen very often.
Yeah, because you got the conundrum of an animal that seems to behave like a fish and stay under the water most of the time, longer than you would assume an air-breathing vertebrate would be able to. Yet, when it comes to the surface, most fish don't have necks. It's got a morphology like a tetrapod.
Uh-huh.
So this is the only feasible answer I've been able to come up to get around that problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I realize how unlikely it sounds, but it is possible, you know.
Well, I mean, wasn't it very unlikely for the turtle to have that same ability before we discovered it? So I think we find animals with extraordinary abilities all the time, don't we? I always talk to people about
potential
octopus.
answer that is scientific.
It sounds it to me. I mean, with a creature we don't readily know still exists or does not still exist.
Yeah.
Anything's possible, and I think really you can only search for the most plausible theory out there as to why these things happen. But it would seem to me, and I'm wondering if you've studied this particular aspect of Lake Monster, if they're rarely seen in all of the locales they're supposed to inhabit, and if that's the case, you know, maybe this becomes more of a promising theory. If in every locale where there's, let's say, regular, or there have been many lake monster sightings, but rare sightings, they all exhibit this, perhaps the same ability. Now, my theory for a long time was that it was the nocturnal nature of the animal. Maybe it could stay down for a couple of hours. Maybe the neck was long enough to get to the surface and take in a bit of air unseen.
Well,
and
if you took what you're talking about and combined it with this cloacal idea, that makes it even more plausible.
Yeah, it sounds.
I don't
think
they can stay underwater forever, but I think they can stay underwater a long time, probably longer than we assume.
How long can this turtle stay underwater without having to come to the surface? Do they know that?
I've had several different things in the literature. One guy said 3 weeks, which I find a little hard to believe. But, if you'll hang on a minute, I have the files right here. I just have to find them here on the computer.
No,
to tell you.
That's okay. We can add that later. I'll add that detail in for anybody who's interested.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
But it's hours, a long time, you know, at the very least.
I mean, even if you're talking 24 hours, that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough.
And you would have to think, if you scaled it up to a much larger animal, I mean, the Fitzroy River turtle is about the size of an average turtle. You blew this up for an animal, say 20, 25 feet long, would in theory have a much bigger cloaca and would be able to stay down longer and exploit it better than a smaller animal would. I guess. I don't know.
Let's talk about other possible abilities that this animal has as well. Now, you wrote that paper, the abstract about the Lake Champlain hydrophone sounds, the Acoustical Society of America.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that was with Elizabeth Muggenthaler, is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Now, that was a very interesting theory, and a lot of people have experimented with that recently at Lake Champlain as well, and with varying results. What's your personal take on this biosonar, or whatever this creature might actually have? Do you believe it's a possibility? Do you think there's been evidence that has been discovered of this
Well, the sounds from
creature
2000,
exhibiting this ability?
the sounds from 2003 remain unexplained. Sounds that have been promoted by other people in recent years, I believe, are the sounds of known fish in the lake, particularly the freshwater drum, and some of the chirping sounds are probably made by lake sturgeons. However, the sounds that Elizabeth von Muggenthaler recorded in 2003 remain unidentified. That does not mean that they are made by chance. They just remain unidentified. Now,
weren't they, sorry for interrupting me, but weren't they very similar sounding to cetacean sonar, killer whales?
Yep, exactly. The whale sounds that they resemble the most, and I showed this in the documentary, are the sounds of a humpback whale. They call these magap clicks. That's what they resemble the most. And the interesting thing is that the humpback whale is a baleen whale, and it doesn't have a sonar melon like a normal toothed whale that uses echolocation does. Yet it makes sounds like a